The park was always full of noise, children running after pigeons, parents chatting on benches, joggers passing by with music in their ears, and street vendors calling out for customers. In the middle of all this lively energy stood an old upright piano, placed there by a community project to encourage creativity. Anyone could sit down and play, whether they were skilled or just curious. Most people didn't pay much attention to the piano anymore. It had been there for months, and the excitement had faded. A few tourists tried it sometimes, pressing keys randomly just to take photos. Others passed by without even noticing the faded wooden frame. The piano had become part of the scenery, silent, ignored, and forgotten. But there was someone who noticed it every single day. A young street kid. Around 13 or 14, spent his afternoons under a tall tree not far from the piano. He carried a small blanket bag, worn at the edges and faded from years of use. His hair was messy, and his clothes looked too big and too old, as if they had been passed down again and again. He didn't talk to anyone, and no one talked to him. People walking by assumed he was just resting or trying to stay warm. Some avoided looking at him at all, but every day without fail, the kid watched the piano. He watched the way people touched the keys. He watched the way the lid creaked when someone lifted it. He watched how the sunlight reflected off the metal pedals. The piano was like a magnet, pulling his eyes toward it, but he never dared to go near it. Not once. He sat under the tree, hugging his blanket bag tightly, as if it held something important inside. Sometimes he closed his eyes, and his fingers moved slowly over his knees, almost like he was imagining playing something. But the moment anyone came close, he'd stop and look away. For everyone else, he looked like a quiet boy with nowhere to be. But for him, the piano was the only thing that made him feel something close to home. One day, the sky was clear, and the park was unusually calm. A soft wind moved through the leaves, and the usual loud crowd was missing. Maybe it was because it was a weekday, or maybe because the weather was slightly cooler. Whatever the reason, the park felt empty or quiet enough for someone to feel brave. The kid sat under the tree as always, but something inside him felt different. He kept glancing at the piano, quickly turning away each time, as if he wasn't allowed to even think about touching it. His heart was beating fast, though nothing had happened yet. The only person near the piano was an elderly man reading a newspaper on a bench. He didn't look up or pay attention to anything around him. For once, no one was standing near the piano, no one was taking pictures, no one was playing random notes on it. It was just sitting there quietly, waiting. The kid stood up slowly. His legs felt weak, like they might give up on him at any second. He looked around left, right behind him. No one was watching. At least that's what he hoped. He walked a few steps toward the piano, then stopped. His heart pounded louder. What if someone yelled at him? What if the piano made a loud noise and everyone stared? What if he wasn't good enough anymore? But something stronger than fear pushed him forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was hope. He walked closer, step by step, until he reached the piano. His breath grew uneven as he lifted his hand. His fingers trembled slightly. He touched the side of the piano first. The wood felt cool under his skin. It had scratches and marks from years of use, but to him it felt beautiful. He gently pulled the piano bench back. The sound of wood scraping the ground was louder than he expected, and he flinched. He froze, checking if anyone turned to look. No one did. The old man on the bench didn't move. The kid slowly sat down. He placed his bag between his feet, as if keeping it safe. Then he leaned forward and lifted the wooden cover off the keys. It felt heavier than he remembered, but he managed. When the keys were finally uncovered, he stared at them. So many black and white keys. So familiar, yet so far from his life now. His hands hovered above them. He could feel the memories trying to reach him, the warmth of someone teaching him once. The sound of music filling a small room, the feeling of joy when he learned a new melody. But those memories belonged to another time. A time he didn't talk about anymore. He pressed the first key. It made a soft, gentle sound. Not too loud, not too sharp, just right. He pressed another, then another. His fingers moved slowly at first, unsure if they remembered what to do. The notes came out shaky, like they were waking up from a long sleep. But the more he played, the more natural it felt. His hands began to move with rhythm, following a melody he had once known so well. A tune began to form soft and emotional. It wasn't a song people recognized, but it carried a feeling deep enough to make anyone stop and listen. That was exactly what happened. Jogger running past slowed down. He removed his earphones, confused by the unexpected music. He looked around and spotted the kid at the piano. His eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. A gardener near the flower beds paused too. She leaned on her rake and watched quietly. She had seen the boy 100 times before, always quiet, always sitting under his tree. She never imagined he could play like this. The kid didn't notice any of them. His world had shrunk to the keys in front of him. His body relaxed, his shoulders softened, and his fingers flowed across the keys like water. It looked as though he belonged there, like the piano was a part of him. The melody grew stronger, filling the empty space of the park with emotion. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was gentle, thoughtful, full of a kind of sadness that only a kid who had lived through difficult days could understand. More people stopped. A couple walking their dog whispered to each other, amazed. A teenager on a skateboard rolled closer and sat down on the ground, watching in silence. A small group formed, but no one wanted to interrupt. They all sensed something special was happening. The kid played as if he was remembering someone. His eyes didn't blink much, and sometimes his lips pressed into a thin line, like he was trying not to feel too much at once. His fingers moved faster, then slower, and faster again, each change carrying a story that only he knew. When he reached the last few notes, the boy hesitated. His fingers shook again, but this time from emotion, not fear. He pressed the final note gently, letting it fade into the quiet afternoon air, and then it was over. The kid pulled his hands away quickly, as if touching the piano for too long might break the moment. He blinked twice and finally looked up, and that's when he realized people were watching. A small crowd had formed behind him, maybe 10 or 12 people. Some had their hands clasped together. Some looked emotional. No one looked annoyed or judgmental. They looked amazed. The kid panicked. He stood up so fast that the bench made a loud sound again. He grabbed his bag tightly and took a step back, ready to run. His heart raced. He thought he had done something wrong. Street kids were used to being told to move, to stay away, to not touch things. But instead of anger, he heard soft clapping. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, almost respectful, as if they didn't want to scare him away. A woman at the front smiled at him. "That was beautiful," she said in a warm voice. The kid didn't know what to do. No one had said something like that to him in a long time. He looked at the ground, clutching his bag. Another person spoke. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The kid didn't answer. He felt shy, confused, and overwhelmed all at once. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. He felt heard. He felt valued. And it all began with a piano in the park and a moment of courage he never knew he had. People in the park could not stop talking about that boy who had surprised everyone with his sudden piano performance. Many had taken small videos and shared them online, and by the next day, the clips had spread across different social media pages. Some people wondered if he was a child prodigy. Some thought he might be a student from a music school. And others simply admired the emotion with which he played. But none of them knew the truth. The boy wasn't a student, and he wasn't from any music academy. He didn't even own a book, let alone a piano. He was just a street kid who spent most of his time near the small shops and the old bridge. Sometimes he slept in the corner of the bus stand, and sometimes behind the closed stalls where the city lights didn't reach. No one noticed him on normal days. He was invisible to the world until that moment at the piano changed everything. The older man who had been watching him, the one who had placed a hand on his shoulder the day before, had gone back home thinking about the boy all night. Something about the way the boy touched the keys stayed in his mind. It wasn't just talent. It was something deeper, something that came from a place of quiet pain and strength mixed together. He could hear it in the way the boy moved his fingers. Gently at first, then with confidence, and then losing himself completely. It was the kind of sound that didn't need training to be beautiful. So the next morning, that man returned to the park again. The piano sat there just like yesterday, sunlight falling softly on it. But the boy wasn't anywhere around. The man sat by the fountain and waited, hoping he would show up again. He waited for almost an hour, watching people walk, jog, or sit around eating snacks. Still, the boy didn't come. Meanwhile, somewhere near the edge of the marketplace, the boy was sitting on the ground, leaning his back against a closed shop shutter. He had a small bag beside him with a few old clothes in it. His hair was messy, and his hands were cold, even though the sun was out. He looked tired. Not physically, but in the way someone looks when life has been too heavy for too long. He kept thinking about the moment he had played the piano. It felt unreal to him, too. It was the first time he had touched a real piano in his entire life. He had always listened from afar outside music halls, outside cafes where performers practiced, and sometimes through windows of houses where people had their own small keyboards. He never thought he would actually get to play one, even for a minute. But yesterday, something inside him told him to take the chance. And he did. He didn't expect people to clap. He didn't expect the videos. He didn't even expect anyone to care. He just played because it was the only thing that ever made him feel alive, as he sat near the marketplace. A group of kids walked past him. One of them pointed at him and said, "Hey, that's the boy from the video." Another added, "The one who played at the park piano." The boy lowered his head quickly, not wanting attention. He wasn't used to people noticing him. It made him uncomfortable, as if someone was shining a light into the dark corner he always lived in. The kids kept walking, still talking about him. He wished they would forget it was him. Being seen wasn't something he was ready for back in the park. The older man finally spotted him entering from the side path near the big tree. The boy was walking slowly, unsure if he even wanted to come close to the piano today. But his eyes kept drifting toward it, like something inside him needed to feel that touch again. The man stood up and walked toward him gently. "Hey," the man said with a warm smile. "I was hoping I'd see you again." The boy looked at him carefully. The man didn't seem threatening or strict. There was kindness in his voice. "You played beautifully yesterday," the man continued. "I couldn't stop thinking about it." The boy shifted his weight from one foot to the other, not knowing what to say. Compliments made him nervous. They didn't fit into the life he knew. "I just tried," the boy whispered, keeping his eyes on the ground. "Tried." The man repeated softly. "You didn't just try. You felt the music. That's something you can't teach." The boy remained quiet. He didn't want to talk too much. He wasn't used to conversations, especially with adults. But the man didn't push. He kept his tone calm and slow. "Do you want to play again?" he asked. The boy hesitated. Part of him wanted to run away. Another part wanted to sit at the piano and lose himself in the sound again. After a moment, he gave a small nod. The man smiled and stepped aside, letting the boy walk toward the piano. The boy sat down carefully, as if he was afraid the instrument might disappear if he touched it too quickly. He placed his fingers on the keys again, gently at first, and pressed a few notes. The sound rang out clean and warm. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly. Within seconds, he was inside the music again, letting his hands move without fear. People began to gather, some who had seen him yesterday, some new, some recording, some just listening. But the boy didn't see any of them. For that moment, the world disappeared, and all that existed was the piano. The man watched with a mix of surprise and amazement. He had suspected the boy had a gift, but seeing it again up close made it even more clear. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a one-time moment. The boy really had something rare. While the boy played, the man quietly walked to the side and called someone on his phone. He spoke in a low voice so the boy wouldn't hear. "I found him," he said softly. "Yeah, the boy from the videos. He's here in the park. You need to listen to this in person. He's extraordinary." A few minutes later, the boy finished playing. When he opened his eyes, he noticed the crowd. He instantly panicked a little and looked down, wishing they would stop staring. But instead of judging or mocking, The crowd clapped again, gentle, warm claps that didn't feel loud or scary. Some smiled at him. Some wiped their eyes because the emotion in his music touched something deep in them. The boy didn't know how to react. He stood up, wanting to walk away quickly. But the older man stepped closer and said, "It's okay. They're clapping because you made them feel something." The boy didn't know how to accept praise, but he gave a small, polite nod just then. Another person arrived, a woman in her late 30s, holding a small bag and wearing a simple dress. She looked like she had rushed over from somewhere. The man waved her over. "This is who I told you about," he said. The woman looked at the boy with a calm, thoughtful expression. "You're the one playing?" she asked softly. The boy nodded again, unsure. She didn't say much. She just listened to the remaining echoes of his music in the air. Then she asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy swallowed. "Nowhere," he said quietly. "I just listened." The woman's eyebrows lifted slightly. She glanced at the man, then back at the boy. "Would you play something again?" she asked. The boy hesitated, but for some reason, something about her voice made him feel safe enough to try again. He sat down once more and started playing a softer melody, this time one he had made up in his head during lonely nights, when he had nowhere to sleep, by the time he finished. The woman looked deeply moved. She stepped closer and said gently, "You have a gift, a real gift, and if you allow it, we would like to help you." The boy froze. Help? He had never heard that word in a way that felt real. He looked at the man, then at the woman, as if trying to understand their intentions. They didn't seem like people who wanted something from him. They looked like people who truly cared. But accepting help was something new for him. Something unfamiliar. Something a little scary. The man saw the confusion on his face and spoke softly. "No pressure. Just think about it. You're not alone. Not anymore." The boy lowered his eyes again, his heart beating fast. For the first time in his life, he felt like a door had opened, one he never knew existed. But whether to walk through it or not, that was a decision he still didn't know how to make.